Bulavinaka and greetings from Fiji. I apologize that I cannot be there in person this afternoon as we are in the midst of preparations for our upcoming national budget. On behalf of the Fijian government and the Fijian people, I want to begin by conveying my heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims of the terrorist attack in Manchester last week. I echo our Honourable Prime Minister's message of sympathy, solidarity and support to the British government and the British people. Fiji, as always, is committed to the defence of our democratic ideals and to fight against terrorism around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the City of London's Green Finance Initiative for the opportunity to address you all at this closing session of the Green Finance Summit. In Fiji, we are gearing up to lead the community of nations to defend and implement the Paris Agreement on climate change at COP23 this November. Our Honourable Prime Minister has recently returned from Germany, where he attended the Petersburg Dialogue and began laying the groundwork for the grand coalition of government, civil society and the private sector that Fiji plans to lead into action in Bonn later this year. Fiji's presidency has come at a time when the multilateral consensus on the need for climate action is under threat by the unclear position of the United States on the Paris Agreement. On an issue where we cannot afford to take a single step backwards, we find ourselves having to renew the call for decisive political action to curb global emissions and ready the world for the severe effects of climate change we know are projected to become worse in the years to come. We've been very pleased with the spirit of optimism and continued commitment from the rest of the international community in the lead up to COP23. From all over the world, powerful voices have spoken up in defense of the consensus for action achieved in Paris at COP21. It has been tremendously reassuring for Pacific Island countries and every other low-lying and vulnerable nation. As we look to lead the negotiations in Bonn later this year, Fiji has been a forceful advocate on the global stage for the interests of small island developing states and every vulnerable nation. We've been particularly keen on bringing new ways of thinking to the processes and frameworks that allow vulnerable nations to access climate finance and build resilience to the impacts of climate change already being experienced. As it stands, there has been a heavy focus on mitigation efforts from the public and private sector. The importance of this work cannot be overstated, but we know that even in the best case scenario of reducing carbon emissions, our coral reefs may never recover, and billions of people will continue to suffer from rising seas, severe weather patterns, and the impact that climate change is having on agriculture and food security. So the need for more serious attention dedicated to adaptation is clear. We need full participation from governments and the private sector to boost resilience in countries like Fiji, who are currently in the front line of the impacts of climate change. Because for vulnerable nations, climate finance and development finance cannot be delinked from one another. Unfortunately, existing climate financing frameworks are not aligned with the experiences on the ground in vulnerable nations. The impacts of climate change are already upon us, and we need innovative ideas and fresh thinking about how financing frameworks can remain effective in the face of this reality. That is why we are calling for a level of participation that is broader than financial commitment alone. We need to rethink the current global climate finance architecture and develop creative financial facilities and instruments that recognize the urgency of our situation and the ability of vulnerable nations to carry out the adaptation work vital to our development. Right now, it is developing nations and ordinary people who are bearing the brunt of the cost of rebuilding from climate-related events and adapting infrastructure to withstand the impacts of climate change. We need to cut through the red tape that is restricting access where it is needed, so that those facing the most severe risks can do what is necessary to develop their economies and secure a viable future for their citizens. In our experience, that means providing new types of financial facilities and building upon the facilities that already exist to allow access to financing to build resilience, boost the transfer and application of relevant technologies, and drive an overall increase in innovation and creativity in the adaptation space. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not need to remind you of how vital your work and commitment are to protecting our planet for future generations. Fiji looks forward to working closely with the men and women, organizations and governments represented at this summit to make our presidency of COP23 a success. and in our continued work to pioneer new solutions to boost global resilience to the impacts of climate change. Minakawakalevu for your time and attention this afternoon.